What's up everyone, it's King Moosh here with JCross X to welcome you all back to episode 14 of Unit Overview. In this series, we'll be analyzing all the playable units in Fire Emblem 3 houses regarding their recruitment requirements, personal abilities, stats, spell lists, and everything in between to determine their strengths and limitations. We also be providing potential class recommendations for all these units, as well as rank them on a tier list at the end of our analysis. These videos are generally gameplay focused, so we do our best to avoid story spoilers, but we always advise you to watch with discretion anyways, and if you haven't played 3 houses yet, we highly recommend that you do.
This episode will be focused on Ashe Ubert of the Blue Lion's House. He is not present in the first prologue battle, but will be playable starting in Chapter 1 if you choose to teach the Blue Lion's House, and is available for recruitment in the following chapter. If you are playing with him in-house, or recruit him out-of-house and are playing through Crimson Flower, he will not miss any major battles. However, for Verdant Wind and Silver Snow, he will miss Chapters 13 and 14 and show up as an enemy in Chapter 15. If you already recruited him prior, once you defeat him in battle, you'll be given the option to spare him, in which he would then rejoin your army. While a lot of these spare or kill options usually need Byleth or someone else to trigger them, this one specifically will be triggered as long as you've recruited him before. As for his actual recruitment requirements, he starts off with his requirements at 15 Charm and C-rank lances with no support. This seems like a relatively steep investment requirement, but Byleth does have a decent Charm growth, and using the Tea Party mechanic can help achieve a higher Charm stat relatively quickly. Unfortunately, if you don't plan on using lances on Byleth, then the lance requirement is a bit out of the way since Byleth has the default starting rank for them and no boon. There are a fair amount of instructors for faculty training, however, as Seth, Gilbert, Shamir, Geralt, and Yuritsa can all teach lances. However, some of these come with inconsistent availability. At C support, the requirements for lances stay the same, but the charm requirement lowers to 12, while at C+, both requirements lower to a 9 charm and D+ lances, both of which are relatively feasible to reach. At B support, the charm requirement is lowered to 6, which is less than Byleth's base charm at level 1, while the lance requirement comes down even lower to a D rank. There are multiple avenues you can take to raise his support. You can consider looking for his lost items, although the first ones appear a little later than most, not being present until Chapter 6 where his bundle of herbs can be found in the cathedral. In Chapter 9, you can find his evil repelling amulet near the fishing pond. Lastly, returning to the cathedral in Chapter 11, you can find his Moon Knight's tail. Since his items are available a bit later than some, you can opt to give him some of his favorite gifts instead. This includes Violet, which is a type of flower, Legends of Chivalry, exotic spices, tasty baked treat, Ancient Coin, and the Owl Feather, which is enjoyed by all units. Another way to increase Ashe's support while also potentially raising his and Byleth's charm is tea parties. To have an easier time with these, you should consider using some of Ashe's favorite tea blends. The 4 blends he prefers are Angelica Tea and Mint Leaves, as well as the Hresvelg blend and Lester Cortania like every other unit present within the game. As for a crest, Ashe lacks one, which is generally better for a unit of his caliber. Although I may be getting ahead of myself, Ashe is a unit who struggles a bit in this game, and as such, him lacking a crest is probably a better case scenario, given the fact he can at least take advantage of generic enemy phase setups by damaging himself with the hero's relics, among other things. Vantage Wrath is one of the strongest combos of abilities present within the Fire Emblem series in general, and Ashe doesn't really have any difficulty acquiring these abilities by default. As such, lacking a crest is overall a positive thing for him in our opinion.
Ashe's personal ability is Lockpick. It allows him to open locked doors and chests that would normally require a door key or chest key respectively without actually having a key. This is the exact same ability as Locktouch, the class ability of Thief, Assassin, and Trickster, so Ashe essentially has a useless personal ability while in any of those 3 classes. That being said, even when not in one of those classes, this is easily one of the least useful personal abilities in the game. Auxiliary battles rarely ever have any lock chests or doors, and some of the main missions don't have any either. Even on the maps that do have them, you only get to use the personal ability for a few turns of the battle at most. And on those specific turns, on those specific maps where you could potentially use it, the most it can really do is save you an inventory slot or 2. Door keys and chest keys only cost 300 gold each, and you can check each map before battle to buy as many keys as you need. Overall, this personal ability is both highly situational and has an extremely low ceiling of value, even in situations where it can be used.
Ashe is a unit that fares relatively well in the skill level department, relatively speaking. He has 2 boons, 1 budding talent, and 1 bane. Question is, are they in good areas for him? Well, yeah, they actually kinda are. The 2 boons are in axes and bows, both of which are some of the best weapon types in this game. For axes, he also has a starting rank of E+, which is somewhat appreciated, given that Axe Prowess level 1 is innate to his kit, and can help with early game hit rates, especially if you raise him to D-Axes to pick up the Comet Arch Smash, which also greatly helps with axe accuracy. As for his bow skills, he starts with a D rank in bows, which gives him 3 nice things. Bow Prowess level 1, the Comet Arc Curve Shot, which boosts accuracy and has increased range, and lastly we have the fact that a D bow rank means Ashe can immediately certify for Fighter upon reaching level 5. As for his Bane, it's a pretty non-detrimental area, that being Reason. Ashe has some solid Reason spells since he focuses on wind spells, but his magic stat and growth is nothing exceptional by any means, so this doesn't impact his overall viability. He only has one other thing to concern himself with, and that's his budding talent and lances. Like most budding talent, you have to do 12 instructions of the skill with Ashe to unlock the associated combat art or skill, which in this case is Shatter Slash, which I'll go into more detail later when talking about his dependent combat arts. Overall, Ashe is a unit that's not really held back by his skill levels. Although he has no boons in either riding or flying, he doesn't have a bane for the skills either, while his boons and budding talents are in appreciated areas.
Ashe has a pretty mixed set of base stats with some clear strengths and weaknesses. Taking a look at his bulk, his physical bulk is pretty subpar for a physical unit. His base defense of 5 is on the lower end of average, and unfortunately his base HP of 23 is quite subpar, tied for the second lowest in the game. In contrast, his base res of 6 is actually above average for a physical unit, though it's still not really high enough for him to shrug off magic damage. The best part of his defensive profile is his base speed of 9, which is tied for the second highest in the game behind Petra. Despite his low HP, he can usually avoid being one-rounded, even on maddening difficulty, because very few enemies are fast enough to double him. His other standout stat is his base dex of 8, which is tied for the second highest in the game behind Byleth. Alongside his solid base luck of 6, his base dex contributes a little bit to crit rates, but mostly to his accuracy in the early game. His gambit accuracy, however, will be a lot less consistent than regular attacks due to his middling base charm of 5. Magic's also stuck at only a base 5, this doesn't really affect him much at all since he doesn't start with any spells. Finally, his base strength of 8 is nothing special and certainly won't make him a great damage dealer, but it's fairly average and serviceable compared to other units. Overall, Ashe has a decent set of base stats that are mostly carried by his speed and dex. As for his growth rates, this is where Ashe struggles a lot more. I said his base strength was fairly average, but his strength growth is definitely subpar at only 35%. This means he is likely going to fall behind your other physical units rather quickly in terms of damage output. It is also indirectly a nerf to his attack speed, since strength allows units to offset the effect of equipment weight. That being said, his speed is still pretty high at 50%, which alongside his great base stat makes him definitely one of the faster units in the game. It's the second highest growth rate behind his dex, which is tied for the second highest in the game at 55%. This is very helpful for his accuracy, and notably, alongside his above average luck growth of 40%, makes him capable of very consistent crit rates with the right build. On the other hand, his gambit accuracy will likely be pretty poor due to his charm growth rate being only 25%. All the other areas are pretty underwhelming too. His magic growth is also only 25%, that doesn't matter too much for his kit. His physical bulk is pretty bad with 35% HP growth and a pitiful 20% defense growth, though he's definitely better off against magical attackers due to his 35% res growth. I wouldn't say it's good enough for him to be a dedicated res tank, but he definitely doesn't have to respect magic damage as much as most physical units do. Ashe really isn't the greatest statistical unit overall, though there are some good areas, he is dragged down a lot by his poor strength.
Ashe has a fair amount of combat arts, one of which he unlocks via ranking up his axe skill, and the others his bow skill. He also has one that I mentioned earlier when talking about his budding talent lances, and that art is Shatter Slash. For the cost of 3 durability, this combat art boosts might by 4 and hit by 10, which isn't too impactful, but it does come with the added effect of lowering the target's defense by 5 for 1 turn when struck by this art. This provides decent utility, but is usually never preferable just to outright one-rounding an enemy unit unless it's a boss with a significant amount of HP. As for his axe combat art, Ashe unlocks Focus Strike at C+ axes, which in our opinion is a bit of a strange choice. Ashe already has quite a high dex stat, and most of attacks will be relatively accurate. This art boosts hit by 30, which is definitely the highest in the game for axe combat arts, but isn't too impactful considering there's no other boost for the stats when using this art. He might have appreciated an art with a higher might boost given his lackluster strength, and honestly I can't really see a use case for Focus Strike over Smash on Ashe specifically. As for bows, he has 2 combat arts that are unlocked for ranking up the skill. The first one comes at C+ bows where Ashe unlocks Deadeye. This art costs 5 durability and boosts might by a decent amount of 6, with no other stat buffs. However, the main appeal of this art is its range, that being 3 to 5 tiles. Even though it doesn't boost hit, there are a fair amount of ways to improve hit in this game, and those methods in conjunction with Ashe's good dex can allow for some relatively reliable Deadeyes. It certainly won't be one-rounding anything, but it can potentially be used to snipe a low HP target or do some decent chip damage. Lastly, we have Weighing Shot at A bows for Ashe, which is another utility combat art. It costs 3 durability, boosts might by 4 and hit by 10, with the additional effect of lowering an enemy's strength by 5 for 1 turn after they are struck with this attack. Although this can make strong enemies less threatening, we generally think the -5 defense from Shatter Slash is more impactful on tough enemies in order to fell them as quickly as possible. However, it's still a decent alternative to Curve Shot since it has a small hit boost, decent might boost, and an increased max range of 3 tiles. Overall, Ashe's combat art selection is not too impressive. It's not the worst one we have seen by far, but the lack of axe combat arts is mildly unfortunate, and while the bow ones are solid, they aren't too groundbreaking by any means.
The only dependent ability that Ashe gets is Battalion Desperation and Rank C Authority. This ability activates only when it's equipped Battalion's Endurance at 1/3 of its maximum or lower. It also requires Ashe to be the one initiating combat, so this only works during the player phase. When the conditions are met, he receives a Desperation effect. This means that whenever Ashe is fast enough to double an enemy, the attacks happen consecutively, rather than allowing the enemy a chance to counterattack in between. If he fails to kill the enemy though, he will still have to deal with the enemy's attack after. It is an excellent ability for speedy units, allowing them to leverage their ability to double enemies for damage output, without having to worry about enduring damage themselves. Since Ashe is a pretty fast unit, this could theoretically be quite good in him. It's certainly a nice addition to his player phase build options, though there's an unfortunate issue with it in Ashe's kit, as we'll discuss in more detail later.
As I discussed earlier, Ashe is not a unit that is focused much on magic considering he's a broke-ass just like me, and he has no magical background or education. As such, his Reason spell list leaves a bit to be desired. At D rank Reason, Ashe unlocks the low weight spell Wind, which is one of the better starting spells. Although it comes in only 2 might, it makes up for that in pretty much every other area. It has 100 hit, 10 crit, only 2 weight, and the highest uses for the low weight Reason spells at 12 uses. It's a very reliable early game spell, and usually with decent speed, casters can double with it given how light it is. Next up we have Ashe's only other Reason spell, Cutting Gale at C Reason. While Cutting Gale is the next spell in the win line, it doesn't weigh as much as many other spells at this level with only 5 weight. It still has a decent amount of uses too at 6, and retains a very good hit of 95. The crit stays the same at 10, but the might is increased up to 7, which is an appreciated damage buff from Wind. Next we have Ashe's face spell list, which isn't much more expansive. Just like every other unit, he unlocks Heal and Nosferatu at D and D plus face skill ranks. Heal provides Ashe with basic white magic healing to adjacent allies, while Nosferatu provides him with basic white magic damage that heals him for 50% of damage dealt, rounded down. At C Faith, Ashe learns his last face spell, Physic. The spell has 8 might and is able to heal a distant ally with the range being equal to half the user's magic stat. Overall, the spell is pretty useful for dedicated casters, able to provide healing from the safety of the backline. However, for Ashe specifically, his magic is not really that impressive, and despite his middling strength, he is still better off as a physical unit in most situations. This reflects in this list, as you might have been able to tell, since not only is said magic stat really low, but the amount of spells he acquires is too.
Ashe is not exactly considered to be one of the best units in this game, but he does have a few strengths. As I mentioned before when discussing his stats, he has very high dex and solid luck that can make his crit rates very consistent. This makes him a good candidate for killer weaponry and builds like Vantage Wrath that rely on crits. These types of crit-focused builds are the best way for him to maintain kill power despite his middling strength. Ashe also has a rare combination of boons, having a boon in both bows and axes, and potentially lances as well after unlocking his budding talent, which is only shared by Cyril. These are both very useful boons that allow him to easily access some of the most useful classes in the game, such as Archer, Brigand, Sniper, and the Wyvern classes. His high dex and easy access to hit plus 20 are also very helpful for the accuracy of Deadeye, which is probably his most unique combat art since only Ashe, Bernadetta, and Yuri can obtain it. Opinions on Deadeye are pretty mixed, but having the option to attack from a very long range in certain situations can be very useful. Even if it misses, it can at least be used to safely bait enemies. Ashe is also one of 2 units, the other being Catherine, that can enable access to the Falling Short of Heaven paralog battle starting in Chapter 9. This battle is most known for granting the Shoes of the Wind as a reward, which permanently boosts a unit's movement by 1 when consumed. It also grants some other useful items in the Gaspar Knights battalion, which has decent stats, though it's definitely not one of the best battalions in the game.
Ashe is somewhat lacking in a few areas, and that shows in his list of weaknesses. Firstly, I have to once again mention that his selection of combat arts is relatively lackluster. I want to preface this point and say that the individual combat arts he has are fine, but overall as a list they just aren't the strongest collectively. There is some solid utility in the list, but nothing that stands out specifically for an offensive presence. Unfortunately, this isn't helped by his stats either. While of course his dex and luck are quite good, his strength for a more physically oriented unit is not great. You would think that his speed would more than make up for this, but he isn't even the fastest unit in his house, or even the fastest male for that matter, since he is beaten out that department by Felix. While he does get Battalion Desperation, there are just faster units that are generally better candidates for the ability, especially females who have access to Darting Blow. There really isn't enough present in his kit to make up for the middling strength that he has. Additionally, while there are multiple personal abilities that are relatively useless or are only useful for a period of time, Ashe's personal is not only bad, but obtainable through other methods in the form of the class abilities of certain sword classes like Josh mentioned earlier. The convenience factor of it isn't really worth it either, considering chest keys are cheap and an abundantly available supply. It is true that having a full inventory when unlocking these chests does send items straight to the convoy, but that's not strong enough of a niche considering some of the items won't even be useful until after the current battle concludes. All these weak points tie into one major one, and that is Ashe has nothing really unique to build around. While we mentioned this a few episodes ago for Felix, he at least has insanely good stats and a genuinely helpful and reliable crest too, which is something that not a lot of units can say. Ashe has neither, and as such he is relegated to just spamming Hunter's Volley in the player phase, or focusing on a generic enemy phase setup by mastering both Warrior and Mercenary.
As for beginner class recommendations, for the most part, we think Fighter is usually the best choice. Ashe's starting ranks make it a 0 investment certification, and its mastery ability, Strength plus 2, is generally the most useful ability for him. It's especially helpful on builds where the boost applies twice, like speedy doubling builds or brave combat arts like Hunter's Volley. That being said, the other 2 physical beginner classes are both solid options. Soldier is a bit higher investment, but still manageable because of his budding talent and lances, and it grants him the most useful positional combat art, Reposition. Since Ashe doesn't exactly have the highest value player phase, especially in the early game, using his turn to help with stronger units positioning can be a very valid choice. As for Myrmidon, it's the highest investment option since he has no boon or budding talent in swords, but its master ability, Speed plus 2, can be fairly useful. Since Ashe doesn't get Darting Blow, this is one of the only abilities that can boost his speed, even if it's not a large boost. I'd recommend Fighter in most cases, but Myrmidon might be better for doubling builds based around Battalion Desperation, and Soldier might be better if you're planning on benching him in the future and just want to get some short-term utility from him before that. Moving on to the intermediate classes, Archer and Brigand should both be heavily prioritized. Archer is the easiest certification because of his starting bow rank and boon, and its mastery ability is extremely useful hit plus 20. This accuracy boost makes his combat much more reliable, which is especially helpful for Deadeye due to his low accuracy at long range. It's a pretty great class in terms of combat performance too, due to the extra tile of bow rings that it grants. As for Brigand, this class offers almost nothing in terms of combat performance, but its main benefit is his mastery ability, Death Blow. This gives him much greater damage output in the player phase, providing a significant power spike that helps to offset his low strength. It's almost equally easy to certify for due to his starting rank in boon and axes. Deciding which of the two you want to prioritize first just comes down to whether you need the accuracy or damage boost more urgently. Once Brigand is mastered, I think it's perfectly fine to just leave Ashe as an archer for the rest of the intermediate stage, though there are a few other classes that are worth considering. If you're planning on running an enemy phase build later, you might want to consider certifying for Mercenary. It requires a fairly significant amount of sword investment, and is pretty mediocre in terms of combat performance, but the main benefit is its mastery ability, Vantage. This is a staple of enemy phase setups, typically when paired with Wrath. Another certification that can be useful is Armor Knight. It is the same max requirement as Brigand, so you just need a little bit of heavy armor training to certify for it. That heavy armor investment can also give you a head start towards the useful ability weight -3 for doubling builds. The main benefit of this class is the high base defense, which can give Ashe a significant defense boost upon certifying for the class. You only need to certify for it, rather than actually spending any time using it in combat. The sooner you pick up the certification, the more defense you will gain from it, so if you're going to certify for Armor Knight, then I would do it as soon as possible. The only other class I want to mention is Cavalier, which is the highest performance combat class during this stage because of its high movement and Canto. If you're investing in his budding talent and lances, which helps with the certification, and you're planning to use more cavalry classes later in the game, then you should definitely consider using Cavalier. Otherwise, I think most players will be perfectly fine just leaving him an archer, especially since Cavalier has a speed growth penalty which can be detrimental to his doubling builds.
As for advanced class recommendations, there aren't too many to cover. By far and away Ashe's best option though is Sniper. We have briefly mentioned this before, but the one thing that allows pretty much any unit, even magic ones, to have good damage in the player phase is just to utilize Sniper. It can attack safely from multiple tiles away, and any unit with a budding talent or boon and boast can easily certify for it. The main appeal is the coveted mastery combat art, Hunter's Volley. It's unironically one of Ashe's only decent ways to be a prevalent threat in the player phase, especially with his above average hit rates and his high luck and dex resulting in relatively frequent critical hits when using this art. For enemy phase focused options, Warrior is something Ashe can reach with not too much issue due to his boon and axes. The class itself isn't great, but the one thing it does have is a mild hyperfixation on strength. If you're lucky with level ups in this class, it can help offset one of Ashe's main weaknesses, assuming some time is spent in it. The main appeal though is just Wrath, the Mastery of Warrior which boosts crit by a substantial 50 while being attacked in the enemy phase and assuming the unit with this ability equipped has less than or equal to 50% of their max HP. Generic Wrath Vantage is one of Ashe's better setups, so picking this mastery up could be vital depending on how you plan to use them. The only other threatening class I could somewhat recommend is Wyvern Rider, but if anything this is mostly just a standard recommendation for most physical units. Wyvern Rider itself has some great stat boosts and an amazing mobility during the advanced stage with 7 movement, flight, and canto. Nothing too different from when we have mentioned it before, it's always just usually a good option because of how broken the class is. Ashe himself at least has a boon in axes as well as a budding talent and lances, so despite lacking a boon in flying, the certification shouldn't be too difficult. The last decent recommendation we have for you is Paladin, mainly due to Ashe's budding talent and lances. He isn't really a superb lance user, but Paladin itself is a mobile class with 8 move and canto alongside Lancefire to help boost his lance damage as much as possible. He doesn't have a boon in riding to help certify for the class, but if he does manage to become a Paladin, the skill XP boost Paladin provides can help boost his riding a bit more for one of his master stage options. Speaking of the master classes, there are really only 2 to cover. Bow Knight can be a decent ending point for Ashe, and as I just said, Paladin's skill XP boost for riding can help him push for the class faster. Bow Knight itself has an extremely long effective range of 8 movement on top of bow range plus 2, and combined with Ashe's Deadeye, pretty much every unit on the map could be in his range. Although the accuracy and power of set attack could definitely be lackluster, it's an interesting option for him nonetheless, especially if he ends up fast enough to double certain units. Lastly, Wyvern Lord of course follows any unit we recommend Wyvern Rider for. Although it's often unnecessary and a bit hard to reach due to the stricter skill requirements, it's still one of the best classes in the game with amazing stat boosts across the board, alongside good class abilities, specifically with a Void plus 10 pairing nicely with Ashe's natural elusiveness. The class of course has unmatched movement as well, with 8 move, flight, and canto.
As for Ashe's tier placement, there's no doubt he's going into the lowest tier, the C- tier. I think most people are generally in agreement that he's one of the worst units in the game. The only debate we really had over this placement was whether we should make a D tier just for him, but we decided it wouldn't really be necessary. He's really not that bad, but there's just very little reason to use him over other units, which mostly applies to the other 2 units we place in this tier, even if we think they're both slightly better than him. That may be something we reconsider later, but for now at least, we think this is a good placement. Keep in mind that even the weakest units in this game could still be extremely strong in the late game with the right build, so you're not sabotaging yourself by using Ashe if you like him as a character. His build options are pretty varied, since he isn't particularly great at any one specific niche. There are 3 separate build recommendations I want to briefly cover in this section. The first is a low investment sniper build. It's a very simple build, where you just run bow prowess 5, hit plus 20, death blow, strength plus 2, and bow crit plus 10. The main purpose of this build is just to one-round enemies with Hunter's Volley, or occasionally use Deadeye, supplemented by the 2 accuracy boosting abilities to poke at long range. Usually equip him with both a Silver Bow Plus and a Killer Bow Plus. You can take a pretty reliable gamble for crits with the Killer Bow Plus, whenever the damage from the Silver Bow Plus falls short of securing the kill. If you don't feel like investing much into Ashe, this is a pretty great option. All you really need to do is train axes a bit to get Deathblow from Brigand, and then you can just train bows the rest of the game that coast through Archer or Sniper, landing in a comfortable endgame. For more unique builds with potentially higher ceiling, there are a couple options you can go with. Another one is a doubling build based around Battalion Desperation. You could theoretically run this in a lot of different classes, but I think that high mobility classes like Wyvern Lord or Bow Knight are usually the best fit. For this build, I typically run either Axe Prowess 5 or Bow Prowess 5, Deathblow, Battalion Desperation, and the last 2 slots are flexible depending on your specific needs. If you're not able to consistently double enemies, you definitely might consider using consumable items to boost the speed stat, but some helpful abilities can be Speed plus 2, Weight minus 3, and Defiant Speed if mastering Bow Knight. To increase his kill power, you can consider running Strength plus 2, Axe Crit plus 10, or Bow Crit plus 10. Finally, if you need more accuracy, you should consider running Hit plus 20 in addition to your chosen prowess skill, or in place of it if you're planning on using multiple weapon types. The last build I want to go over is an enemy phase setup based around Vantage Wrath. Once again, I typically run this build in the highly mobile class options, Wyvern Lord and Bow Knight. In addition to Vantage and Wrath themselves, we typically run many of the same abilities recommended for the doubling build. If you're using Wyvern Lord, we typically fill the last 3 slots with Axe Prowess 5, Hit plus 20, and Axe Crit plus 10, just to make sure his accuracy and crit rates are reliable. For Bow Knight, we usually use Bow Prowess 5, Close Counter, and Strength plus 2. Bows have lower might, so the damage boost from Strength plus 2 is appreciated, but if you're doing enough damage without it, then you may want to consider Bow Crit plus 10 or Hit plus 20 in that slot instead for consistency. Close Counter, alongside the class ability Bow Range plus 2, offers a very nice advantage over the Wyvern Lord build, allowing him to counterattack almost any enemy regardless of range. To get a similar effect with the Wyvern Lord build, you will most likely need another unit to cast a Retribution Gambit on him. The idea behind this build is to lower his HP below half intentionally, equip him with a Killer Axe Plus or Killer Bow Plus, and position him in range of a group of enemies. When they initiate combat with him, he will attack first because of Vantage, and have a very high crit chance with this attack because of Wrath, hopefully allowing him to kill each enemy in one hit before he even takes any damage. The Sniper build and Vantage Wrath build are both very generic options that pretty much any unit could use. However, that is unfortunately just the reality of Ashe builds, since he really just doesn't have that many unique strengths to build around. If you have more creative ideas, please leave them in the comments, since neither of us have a lot of experience with trying to make Ashe work in maddening difficulty. That's about all I have to say about Ashe. If you enjoyed the video or have any thoughts of your own, please leave a like and make sure to comment. I also recommend checking the description if you're not already subscribed to both of our channels. If you're following our Persona Overview series, the next episode will be released on Saturday on Jeff's channel. As for this series, stay tuned for the next episode of Unit Overview, which is about the next member of the Blue Lions house, Annette Fantine Dominic, on my channel next Tuesday. Thanks for watching.
I can't lose! That was tough.